Welcome to Filed, a monthly conversation with those at the convergence of data privacy, data security, data regulations, records, and governance. I'm Anthony Woodward, CEO of RecordPoint, and with me today is my co-host, Chris Brown, RecordPoint's VP of Product Management. How are you, Chris, today?
I'm very good, Anthony. How are you?
Yeah, good. I think it's been a really strong start to the year over here and so much happening in our world.
No, it's been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to today's guest as well.
Yeah, why don't we get straight on and do the introduction? I think that's with you today, so we're switching gears.
Yeah, look, I know. We're just sort of turning things around today. So, look, I want to welcome Randy Lindberg here from Rivial. Hi, Randy. Great to have you on the show, Filed.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Mate, thank you so much for coming on. Look, and I'd love to start by discussing maybe a little bit of background, how you came to found Rivial. You're going to have to give us the quick little explanation on the name there as well. And let's tell the audience a little bit about what they do, what you do there at Rivial.
Sure, absolutely. I'll hit some of the highlights. I'll go as fast as I can without boring everybody. So going way back, I was in the ROTC here in the United States, which meant that I was going straight into the Air Force out of college. And they sent me down to Montgomery, Alabama, if anybody knows where that is. And they said, Randy, you're going to be the Information Systems Security Officer. My first step was figuring out how to spell security because I had not done it in any way, shape, or form ever. But the beauty of an Air Force officer is they put you there and you get to figure it out. So I realized very quickly as I was completing my physical 3-inch binder, if anybody's been in security for a while, they can appreciate that, for the presentation once a quarter. And I found that I just really liked security. So when I got out of the Air Force, I went into consulting, not my own company, but working for another company. And I ended up picking up a document. It's NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, or maybe Standards and Technology. I always forget the S. But it's 800-30. It's all about risk management. And that's kind of what I latched onto as a security person. And so when I went from consulting into managing security for a Fortune 50 retail company, I was doing risk assessments on things like the largest pharmacy app in the application in the country and those kinds of things. And the NIST product, that document and the model, wasn't working very well. So I started building my own. Eventually, I ended up at a bank. It was a regional bank. And around the same time, I was working on some MBA classes. And I was in a finance class of all things. And they covered Monte Carlo analysis, which is a statistical analysis of uncertain events, trying to predict uncertain events. So I tied together the NIST model that I was tweaking and Monte Carlo analysis. And I basically built a different way to do risk assessments. And at the same time I was at a bank, I was trying to find security services, and I really couldn't find people who knew what customer service was. It was a bunch of technical security folks, which I love those folks, don't get me wrong, but they didn't really know how to take care of me as a customer. So I kind of combined those things in around 2010 to start Rivial with a couple goals in mind. One was to take care of clients properly. We bend over backwards for clients. That was very important for me. The second was improving risk assessment. And then the third major goal was really to make cybersecurity management easier. And that's, we talked about it a little bit before the recording here, and that's where the name comes from. It's slightly embarrassing, but when I created the name, there was a cheesy slogan that went along with it that basically security management was supposed to be trivial. Right? I wanted to make it so easy it was trivial. So if you take trivial and you lop off the T, you have a made up word that's Rivial. So is it a great name? Probably not. But I've talked to marketing companies over the years and they said, no, it's not what we would pick, but it's good enough. Right. So it stuck and it's been there for 14 years. And so that's where it comes from. And really what I do at Rivial, I try to continue refining our solutions, which is software plus services around cybersecurity management, and create the highest value, reasonably priced offerings for our clients, and really to help take care of those clients, which means I make coffee, I take out the garbage, I vacuum, all those things that a respectable CEO does.
Did you hear that, Anthony?
Can you believe it blanked out for me? I had no idea what was just said.
But perfect. What he said was that you need to look after me better. That's what he said. So, right, you need to fetch me coffee more often, those sorts of things. So just, you're good.
The only point I heard was taking out the garbage, but I wasn't sure, Randy, whether that was metaphorical or an actual taking out of the garbage.
What I pieced together here is that you need to take care of Chris and take out the garbage. So is that one and the same?
Fair enough. The reason I go there is a lot of where we focus, and I think he's very much that thing, and I'd love to get some context for Rivial. In terms of your context, do you really think about what aspect of cybersecurity, and is taking out the garbage in a digital context part of that?
Absolutely. I didn't intend that and hadn't really thought about it, but in a sense, yes. And so if we get into risk management a little bit more, there is a lot of metaphorical garbage in cybersecurity when people don't do proper risk assessments because they're not really understanding the business context in which they operate. They're not understanding the real risk to the organization. And they might be out buying tools and doing those kinds of things where you could consider that garbage. So
Yeah.
I think it's a very good question.
Yeah. And so give us the landscape. I love that background. I love the problem and the space that you're solving there. When you talk about Rivial today, what are the top 2, 3 use cases that you really dive into for customers?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say the top handful is overall just making cybersecurity management easier. One of the main goals, and we built a platform, we provide services that go with it. And so those two things combined, our vision is that we can help anybody confidently manage a cybersecurity program. And that is, all of the things that a security leader does, right? There's the technical space with the SIM and the XDR and antivirus and all of those things. We're one layer above that where we tie together, basically tie the business to the technical security program. So doing things like risk management, managing compliance with internal policies or some kind of external regulation or document, just making all of that easier, winning at the whack-a-mole game that is vulnerability management, right? So that's one of the major goals. Another one is I talked about risk assessment. That's really my thing. So I lean on that quite a bit. But the second goal is really helping people manage risk better. And that starts with doing a better job assessing risk. And we're kind of stuck in our industry. One of the things I want to fix in our industry, being cybersecurity, just across the board, is we as security people traditionally go out and we kind of put our finger in the wind and go, oh, this is a high risk. This is a medium risk. This is a low risk. And then we go to the board of directors or executives, whoever makes that decision, and we say, hey, we have a high risk. We need to spend $50,000 to reduce that to a medium. And they go, what? Right? They don't have anything better to extract information from. So they're forced into making decisions based on that just ambiguous detail. And so I think that makes us as security people look bad. And I can tell you when we get in and we actually use our software and we're using Monte Carlo analysis, we're measuring risk better. It facilitates better conversations with those people making decisions, right? Because they speak in dollars and cents. And when you can go to them with risk measured in dollars and cents, it's a more meaningful conversation. That's kind of the second main goal. The third one is it kind of goes in line with those the first two, which are making cybersecurity easier, management easier, better risk assessment, and that's just automating as much as humanly possible. So using software, using mechanisms and streamlined processes, again, just to automate as much as possible, but particularly compliance. Nobody likes compliance. Nobody likes doing it. They just want it to be done. And then that's where we help people as well.
I feel seen. The nobody likes compliance piece. I mean, this is sort of where we live, right? So,
Sure.
here at RecordPoint, we're obviously there trying to help organizations not only manage their risk and obviously manage all of their privacy requirements and other regulations, but it's that compliance element that they get at the end. There's all the other benefits up front, but no one really wants to deal with the compliance piece. It's almost like you have to. And I guess one of the pieces here that's where we're a little bit more aligned is trying to get it to a place where the outcome is compliance by doing all of the other good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm really interested in only we haven't talked much on the podcast, but we do a lot at RecordPoint, thinking about different ways to quantify risk. And it sounds like you guys are really on top of it. We talked a little about things like Monte Carlo analysis and regression and mathematics. Is your application of that purely through that method? Like, how do you deal with things like the law of averages over that analysis and the impact of those considerations? Or do you start to weigh that out? I think the listener would be really interested to understand not so much your IP, but how that approach is done.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Law of averages. There are a lot of things that we would like to do just in the security space in general, but it's hard to kind of move people along. Going from high, medium, low measurements, some kind of ordinal scale, 1 through 5, high, medium, low, to statistical analysis is a pretty significant jump, right? And so we're just trying to get people to make that jump. Once they do that, then we can dig in and mature the program over time. But really, it's just making that initial leap that, again, it's very, very difficult to a point, and I might be a little off topic here, but when we have a new client and we present to them the results of their risk assessment. We've run the statistical analysis. We give them the results. It shows actual dollars and cents, financial figures, and return on investment for the recommendations we're making. If we don't have some kind of stoplight chart, like a red, orange, green, or red, yellow, green, they panic because all of the risk assessments they've received in the past have some kind of high, medium, low chart. I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but just for their peace of mind, for new clients, we put in a stoplight chart, high, medium, low. And they go, oh, cool, I have my stoplight chart. And then they go to the next page and they go, oh, this is interesting. Tell me about these financial figures. And that's where the conversation really starts. So they kind of cruise past the stoplight chart. They get to the financial figures, and that's where like I said, earlier, the meaningful conversation starts. And so just getting to that point, leaving out, the law of averages, and those other, I'll call them fudge factors in risk assessment. We've tried to take those into account just in the way that we get opinionated with how our software works, because people aren't quite there yet. And again, I'm not trying to make fun of people or be condescending, but we kind of hide all that until people ask. For example, this is different than what you're asking, I think, a little bit, but a lot of people ask about cyber insurance. I go, oh, well, I don't need to worry about this because I have insurance.
Yep.
Well, that's not really how risk assessment works, right? I get the idea, but the idea is to measure it, right? You get your impact, your likelihood or probability. In our case, you end up with your inherent risk. You look at controls and you get to your residual risk. And when you look at that and measure that residual risk, then you go do something about it, whether you mitigate it, accept it, or transfer it, which is insurance, right? So that's a risk treatment mechanism. So people ask, oh, well, can I consider insurance? Well, yes, but way later in the process.
Yeah, and the reality is all insurance doesn't offset 100% of your risk, right?
Absolutely.
That's the key denominal factor here.
Yep.
When we talk about cyber and the risk of cyber, which is an ever-evolving landscape, which is partly why I brought up the question around there is no true law of averages. That was probably a made-up Anthony term, but the floor of averages is probably a better way to put it. I guess where I was headed with that is because it's an evolving landscape, traditional Monte Carlo simulations and traditional ways to assess risk, treasury in a bank and those kind of things are all around the predictability of an event. Because cyber is evolving so quickly, how do you deal with that evolution and those externalities that are going to occur?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a very good point. As far as externalities go, when you ask the question, my mind jumps to artificial intelligence because it's being used on both sides, right? The bad guys and the good guys. And now the arms race has kind of escalated and sped up in certain cases because, externalities, one thing that jumps to mind is phishing, just kind of your standard email phishing attack, right? That risk has changed significantly. So if you did a risk assessment a year ago or 2 years ago, even a year ago, actually, 6-12 months ago, it needs to be updated because phishing attacks are better. You can dig into the statistics, but when you look at phishing attacks, it used to be that vast majority of them were written by somebody who was English as a second language. It looked like it was just poorly written. Now, the attackers can go out there, regardless of what language they speak, with the right prompts. They have Chat GPT or something like that, some kind of large language model, writing an email for them that's, in our case, in perfect English. Grammar's correct, spelling is correct. It looks like a legitimate email. And so one of the means that users had of just noticing, just detecting phishing attacks is kind of gone now when you have artificial intelligence available to the attackers as well. So that kind of externality, those things are coming in. On the security side, of course, we have artificial intelligence now to defend against that. So again, that arms race. But back to the risk assessment. Yeah, for me, it really comes down to keeping the risk assessment up to date over time. So it used to be, and I don't know that this was ever acceptable, but it used to be that people did a risk assessment once a year. They'd go in, they'd assess the risk, and write a report, put it on the shelf or the virtual shelf, and they wouldn't look at it for another 12 months. Well, 2 or 3 weeks after doing that, it was out of date. And so what we see and what we're trying to push people toward, along with the statistical analysis, is keeping things up to date over time, tying in with external tools, tying your risk assessment in with external tools, pulling that data daily or weekly or monthly and updating the evidence that proves those controls are in place to really measure risk over time. We call it real-time risk. Not that that's proprietary words or a phrase for us. No, but really, yeah, it's dealing with those things. I think you have to look at risk consistently rather than just once a year.
Love it. And so this notion, because one of the things that I've observed a lot in the industry is that risk is seen as episodic. I have an event, I then calculate the risk on the event. Or as you say, twice a year, I have an audit, I have a set of processes, I do these episodic tasks. This notion of risk always on, and I know that that's part of what you're all doing there at Rivial, is really key, isn't it? That risk is something we do every day and we're thinking about it from all sorts of directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to Chris's point, regarding compliance, where nobody really wants to do compliance, but they have to. In a lot of cases, obviously, there's overlap. And so if you're automating compliance and keeping that up to date, and you're tying those same controls in a lot of cases in with your risk assessment as well, you're doing the same, setting up the same integrations, same automations, and keeping your compliance up to date and keeping your risk assessment up to date so you can make proper decisions around risk. So to me, they go hand in hand.
Randy, one of the themes we've been exploring on Fold and obviously through RecordPoint this year is all about sort of shift left. And I'm wondering, what's your take on that as it relates to what you're doing at Rivial, and certainly how are you in that sort of place of what's the goals of embedding security into an organization better? What are the outcomes they're going to get? And I want to be a little bit more targeted. How does that play out, say, for example, in the finance industry? So where's your take on shift left as it relates to your organization?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's not a term we use often. Maybe we should a little more. But I was introduced to that term a few years ago in regards to software development. And so when you think about a workflow from left to right, it's setting up the requirements, designing, building, and testing usually happens way over to the right. So doing that testing, on the left and continuously throughout the process, I think that also applies to, just IT projects as a whole, which involve security, right? And so to your point, when you go purchase something or implement something, any kind of an IT project, whether it's cybersecurity related or just touches cybersecurity, which of course all things IT do, the earlier you can start to define security, the easier and cheaper it's going to be. And you guys know this. And there are certain cases where bolting on security after the fact isn't even possible. Again, it's when you start with, I'm going to go back to risk assessment. Let's say you're going to buy a new solution. If you get all the way through the process, you've purchased the cloud platform or you've purchased, the whatever it is, the application or even hardware these days. You get all the way to the end, you go, oh, okay, now we need to look at security. Well, you might not be able to go back and bolt on security, right? There are tools out there. Let's say your organization is using Okta for single sign-on. And you might, the business unit might go out and get a product and say, hey, this is going to save the day. We need this. Let's put it in. And then let's call the security folks. Well, it might not interact with Okta. It might not be possible. So it might not even be possible to do single sign-on. So you've taken this really cool solution and you've brought it into your organization and you can't secure it, right? It doesn't fit in with the normal processes. So again, for me, once you start that process, I think a risk assessment needs to be done and security needs to be built in. So if thinking about that acquisition or implementation in terms of a workflow from left to right, those security requirements should be way over on the left, right? Shift all of that thinking left rather than trying to bolt it onto the right. And we actually see that, as you can imagine, a lot in the finance industry as well, with cloud and AI specifically, because they just make good business sense. And so we do see that a lot where business people are they're looking for an edge, they're trying to gain a competitive advantage. So they're looking at solutions, they bring in those solutions, they can pay for those solutions if there's no procurement process that involves cybersecurity. And they bring something in, and then the security people are left with holding the bag saying, hey, go make this secure now that we've purchased it. You guys have seen that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, the interesting thing, as you say, is just that element of even shifting left in that purchasing process, right? Like, so you do the right thing, bring that security organization in. Again, honing in a little bit there on that finance sector. Do you see any pitfalls or anything obvious at the moment around how financial agencies are handling their security? And obviously, I'm not asking you to tell us all how we can get into hack into the next bank, but
Well, we can do that after the podcast, can't we?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there'll be a coffee. There's a coffee chat after.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, none of our clients are hackable. No, I'm kidding. Everybody's hackable, but yeah, as far as pitfalls in finance, I think there are a handful that really come to mind for me regularly. And the first is not presenting what the board needs to see. So at most banks and credit unions that we deal with, it's really the board. It's the decision-making body. And so a lot of us, I feel like I'm picking on traditional or security folks with our traditional ways, but A lot of security people will report on the nitty gritty, the stuff that the security person needs to see. They think, oh, it's important to me, so therefore it's important to the board. And in a lot of cases, it just really isn't. The one that comes to mind, I use it as an example all the time, is number of spam messages blocked at the firewall. The people making decisions about the security program just don't need to know that. The security person does, to make sure the firewall is working, configurations are set up properly. But when you report that to the board, these folks are not typical board of directors at a financial institution. They're not meeting every day. They're not thinking about security every day, or even every month, or possibly even every quarter. Right? They get together and they have a bunch of stuff to go through. And I think just us security people, we need to understand the business and what they're thinking about rather than the other way around. And so for my part, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, I created a template. It's free for use. I don't have a link handy, but it's free for use. People can go download it, use it. I was trying to help, where it's essentially reporting cybersecurity to the board. And it hits things at a level that is low enough and detailed enough that the board gets what they need, but not too detailed where their eyes glaze over and they want to move on to the next topic that they understand. So again, that's out there, and just the feedback we've gotten for the last few years on that. People have come to us and said, oh, thank you for doing that, because I used to not have a great relationship with my board, and now I report to them what they need to know, and they love me for it. So that's one, is just not presenting the right information, I think, for the board of directors or for executives in general.
And look, we might steal that link from you at some point and advertise it out with the podcast. So for those who are looking, they might be able to see that in the details of the podcast too. So I think that sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't know the link, but we put it out there. People can download it, use it, because what I'm trying to do is just help people get better at security, right? And part of that is tying the business to security. Because I've been in those shoes. I was a technical person. I've been a business owner for 14 years. And so I kind of see both. Perhaps a slightly different perspective than someone who's just, they've done security their whole career. But to further answer your question, I think number two, if I could go back, I feel like a repeating record here, but that's not measuring and managing risk properly. That's kind of the second thing that we see where security programs kind of go bad. And that's not the security person's fault. I think we as an industry haven't put together the right tools. So we share our model readily. It's not easy to do without software, admittedly, but we share our model readily because I worked on it starting in 2004, 2005, trying to build a model that actually worked, and we refined it over the years. So to share that model with people, they can go do it using spreadsheets and things like that. Again, not easy, but it's doable. As I mentioned before, once you report the correct things to the board of directors at the right level, and then you get into the financial aspect of cybersecurity risk, that's where the board then trusts you, right? There are people out there that have great relationships with their boards. The board gets them, they get security. I totally understand that. But when you report the right information and you report risk in terms of finances and return on investment, the language that business people speak, it just builds a better relationship. They trust the person more. They know what to expect. They know what they're seeing, and they feel like they're part of it, quite honestly. And that's where like I said before, the meaningful conversations start. Specifically in the finance industry, I would just add that unfortunately, what drives security in a lot of cases is compliance, right? And there's nothing wrong with compliance, of course. Examiners are there for a reason. The FDIC, the NCUA, when they come in, they're there for a reason. But when an institution simply reacts to what an examiner is telling them, they don't seem to ever get ahead. They're just constantly in reaction mode. Their program isn't great. They're not able to make improvements because they're just waiting for the examiner to come in and whatever the hot topics are this year, the examiner hits those things. So they're not focusing on building a solid holistic security program. They're just doing whatever the examiner tells them. So they're just reacting all the time.
Yeah, I think there's probably, again, a correlation there to our own industry and our own customers there, in a sense that there can be a focus very much on the compliance without the holistic view. And as I said, I love the idea of, even perhaps for something for ourselves, is that sort of advice back to how to report this up to the board. When I think one of the biggest things that we see in our industry, Randy, is that the practitioner, the information manager, the privacy officer really do struggle to understand how to report that value and in a way that a business person understands. So I already have a mark down here that I'm going to have to go away and read that, and maybe there'll be a further chat about having a look at how I replicate that for this industry as well, because I think that sounds like a really valuable tool and something that organizationally everybody struggles with really at the end of the day. It's to be able to take what you do as an expert and push that through to a board and have them understand in a financial context is an enormous challenge.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think you brought up a really interesting topic, right? You talked about the NCUA, which, just for global listeners, is the National Credit Union Administration in the United States. And you probably can explain it better than me, Randy, but my understanding is they're the regulator that looks at all deposit-taking institutions in the credit union industry and looks at the regulations that wrap them. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So here in the United States, yes, for credit unions, it's the NCUA. For banks, it's the FDIC, Federal Depository Insurance Corporation. And so they're charged with making sure that the banks and credit unions have that security program in place.
And I think what's really interesting and where I wanted to get to on that question was, do you think there's scope for the regulator to go beyond the compliance checklist? Because as you're saying, ultimately the compliance process is marking to an exam. And, I certainly know myself as a learner, I'm hopelessly, like, I can go do exam papers till the cows come home. My memory isn't that big. I actually have to learn the material, have it integrated into me, and then I can go do the exam. Versus, I know others are much better at sponge learning and just knowing that answers by rote and not actually learning it. And I think the latter is a lot of what we see organizations doing is, what's the checklist? How do I meet the checklist? Do you see the regulators moving on where they're starting to benchmark maturity, publishing maturity? You brought up your template that you put out there, which it sounds like it's an awesome way to potentially benchmark your own maturity. Where do you see that going in the industry? Because this is where I think the intersections occurring between data privacy, data governance, and cyber is really understanding the maturity of the organization and how it compares with peers, and therefore how stakeholders should expect those organizations to behave.
Sure. Yeah, I think you make a great point. As far as benchmarking and maturity, I personally don't see that a lot. There might be some examiners out there doing that. We don't see that a lot. And it really comes down to training, quite honestly. The level of scrutiny put on any one financial institution can vary widely, even in the same region, same place, just because of the different folks. And again, I don't want to pick on anybody, but there are examiners who we talk to, maybe it's been a while, who just really have never seen a good risk assessment. They've not been trained properly on how to do a good risk assessment. And so I'll tell a story. It's been several years, so I feel comfortable telling this story. We had an examiner who came in and said, I don't like your risk assessment. So I said, okay, well, what are you looking for? Oh, it's got too much stuff. So we took our report and we started chopping it down, just trying to, we do whatever we can to make the examiner happy. So we started chopping the report down, and they said, no, it's got to be in a spreadsheet. Okay, so we ditched the report. We dug back up the raw results of the spreadsheet, and they said, no, just too much stuff. This is, and so after about 12 back and forth sessions with the examiner, we'd taken our spreadsheet that's, again, this is the raw data, not the report. We would never deliver this directly to a client, but it was, 200 rows of stuff and maybe 20 columns of stuff. We whittled it down to about, I think it was 5 or 6 columns and maybe 12 rows. And once we got it whittled down enough, he said, okay, perfect. That's a risk assessment. And I said, I'm just curious, if you don't mind, for my own edification, Mr. Examiner person, can you enlighten me on how you came about this? Well, he dug up an example spreadsheet of a risk assessment that he had seen probably 10 years prior to that time. And it was 6 columns wide by 12 rows deep. And that's what he was looking for. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not trying to pick on this person. I don't even remember his name. But that's the kind of thing that we deal with across the industry, where the level of scrutiny can vary widely.
Yeah, and I think that we see that quite commonly in a bunch of different areas when people start to talk about quantifying the behaviors of an organization for risk, right? It really does come down to how the auditor is prepared to interpret the risk and the pieces that wrap around that, right? So do you see that evolution then where risk becomes not just a process of compliance in those elements, but integrated into the business models of these organizations? And do you think stakeholders are seeing that? I mean, certainly what we see in our world is much more focus on supply chain, much more, as a SaaS vendor who has data of our clients, there's a real harder look at what does that supply chain equal and where are the risks in that supply chain. Is that what you're seeing when you're doing these risk assessments as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I hope it continues that way. And we're starting to see that trend toward better risk assessment. And certainly for several years now, supply chain, vendor management has become important. But examiners kind of across the board, and our clients, like banks and credit unions, just as a whole, are wanting to do better risk assessments. They realize that there's more to it than just high, medium, low, and not really presenting anything useful. And so what we've seen is a trend. There was a study done maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, fairly recent, and it was talking about the number of organizations doing kind of your normal ordinal scale of risk assessment versus Monte Carlo versus something beyond that. And so the really cool diagram showed that over the last couple of years, more and more organizations are, first of all, doing risk assessments, right? Because not a lot of people did them even as a few years ago, right? But more and more organizations are planning, they're moving toward statistical analysis like Monte Carlo and planning to even move beyond that. So yeah, as far as just a maturity of the industry, hopefully getting past that reaction to exam findings and getting better at, I think it stems from security. Us security people, we need to present risk better. And once we do that, it's a better conversation. It becomes like you said, a business topic rather than just a technical security topic. Once it's embedded in the business discussion, then it can be, I think it's treated as a business discussion. Therefore, the organization is a little more proactive where they identify their own risks and they go, oh, yeah, we need to do something there rather than just push security off to the side and wait for the examiner to bring up a finding.
Yeah, I always find it really weird, right? In there are, I don't know, it's an evolving industry and cyber risk is relatively new, but, we have things like gap accounting and we have all these rules. And in fact, not following a rule results in significant detriment to the business from different stakeholders. These are conversations that are well known around a board table, and we get an auditor in every year. We bring in someone who's really going to be independent and third party to do that examination to a particular standard. We're going to see the evolution of that in its entirety, right, on the cyber side. And I know there's a nascent beginning to that, but do you really see as a part of that shift left piece? And really, when we talk about shift left, we really, really see that moving right up to that board table conversation. Do you think that the quantification of that is going to be as simple in 10, 15, 20 years as what we see in the finance industry and having the kind of standards like GAP and those sort of things? Is that the evolution that we're headed to?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I would say that I hope so. Absolutely. It is funny that you mentioned GAP because one of the most common documents, and I'm not sure if this is global or not, but it's at least United States with, vendor management and just vendors having their own security tested and then providing evidence of that to their customers. And that is, we use a SOC 2. That document actually came from the AICPA, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants.
Spot on. No, you got that. You got that one definitely right.
Accountants testing cybersecurity, right? Doesn't seem entirely logical, but that's the organization that came up with that report format. And so the unfortunate part is that report format leaves a lot of holes. And so what does that do to supply chain risk? What vendor management in terms of these organizations presenting their security to customers? To be seen.
One of the things, you probably can tell from my line of questioning, we're really interested in seeing a maturity matrix for the industry. Is it thinks about these dimensionalities of risk and really thinks about how you can be more effective in that quantification. And I think what you've seen in the finance industry so that stakeholders can assess an organization's risk and value is things like GAP and things like those commonly understood standards that we're operating to in terms of operating models. And I think SOC is a good one, although, probably still early in its evolution.
Yeah, again, I'd like to think so. And as far as maturity for the industry, back to organizations moving to better risk assessment and really just better cybersecurity management. And I think there's a lack of tools, quite honestly. And you guys probably see this as well on the privacy side, but it's all point solutions. And so it's hard, I think, to mature a program overall when you have 3 or 4 or 10 different places you have to go log in to, whether it's doing a risk assessment, keeping track of compliance, maybe managing vulnerabilities, and you have to go somewhere else to get your policies, right? And I think there seems to be in the industry, at least what I've seen, people realizing that managing a cybersecurity program can all be done in the same place, right? We're doing that. Others are doing that. I think when you start to report correctly to the board or executives, get them involved in the conversation so it becomes more about the business. And then you take all of those individual cybersecurity management tools and put them all together. I think at that point, we can really start to mature what we do as security professionals on the management side, right? There's the technical folks who are digging into the weeds, and then there's more of the governance, risk, and compliance CISO type folks. And I think once we tie all these things together, then we'll really be at a point where we can mature cybersecurity management overall.
So let me pick on that a little bit and go, pull your crystal ball out. We like to always ask the future looking question. But if you look forward, let's keep it nice and tight because this space is moving very, very quickly. But say, look ahead 12 months. What's on the horizon? What do you see changing? There's obviously all sorts of regulations that are moving, but what's the two pieces? What's the wish? What do you want to happen in the next 12 months? Reality. What do you think's going to happen in the next 12 months?
Oh, gosh.
And it's okay because that's one of those questions where it's like, how long's a piece of string, Chris?
Yeah, the next 12 months, I was going to cheat and just jump to AI, just because that's where everybody's going. I feel like if you don't mention AI in a presentation these days, it's not interesting to people. What do I wish for in artificial intelligence? I hope that we can figure out, whether it's me and my company or somebody else, and they publish it, make it available, is that we can figure out a good way to not only structure a risk assessment and measure risk properly so that it's based on data, which gives you the ability to bring in machine learning, right? I hope that we can tackle that to add artificial intelligence to the structure that already exists, to the model, and get to a point where we have this computer-human partnership where the computer, the machine learning, that artificial intelligence can dig into the data and make suggestions, right? We can't rely entirely on AI just because, they tend to hallucinate. They might get things wrong, they being artificial intelligence. They might get things wrong. Artificial intelligence is better at digging through data. So my hope is that we can get to a point where we've applied AI in such a way that going through the data can happen in a half a second, and the right risk recommendations are put up in front of our analysts. And those people then can kind of comb through those and make sure that they're right, that those recommendations are valid, the AI model wasn't hallucinating. At the same time, of course, AI, as I mentioned earlier, is also being used by the bad guys. Not even attackers, but just the way that we use AI in security. Everybody's trying to get AI built into everything. And so whether the AI tool is building a policy or it's analyzing an event that occurred on the security event management device or tool, AI is going to get things wrong. It's not perfect. Not that a human could get it right either. It's way faster. And so I hope that people either come up with the right policies. I'm not a big fan of regulation, even though that drives a lot of business our way, admittedly. I hope it's not over-regulated. But at the same time, I hope people are smart about deploying AI so that they do it correctly on their own, right? So it doesn't have to be over-regulated. And so I'll use a Jurassic Park saying from way back in the mid-90s, if you guys have seen that movie, where I think it was Jeff Goldblum's character. He said the Jurassic Park scientists were so busy trying to figure out if they could create dinosaurs, they didn't stop to think if they should. So my hope and fear kind of wrapped into one with AI is that people just take a step back and stop racing to get it in place, but do it in such a way that makes sense.
No, it's a great forecast. And I think the big risk that we foresee, and I'd love to take your view on, as it particularly applies to the financial industry and the use of AI and those things come in the future, is the data going in. So how do you understand, what are you putting into those models? How do you quantify that and those things? And I think those are things we're going to be grappling with for the next 12, 18, 2 years down the track, is that data risk on top of the cyber risk.
Sure, absolutely. And just you could look at that in multiple different ways, right? It's people typing stuff in or inputting things into an AI model, and then it's out, in the public domain. Or what's being plugged into the model and then impacting what comes out again, whether we're relying on AI to write a policy or investigate an incident. The data going in is very, very important. I'm with you there.
No, look, this has been such an interesting conversation, and there's so many more questions I'd love to have of you, Andy, and I think we could talk for hours. I definitely need to find a moment we're in the same town somewhere and buy you a beer and go through it. But I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to you, and I think over 2 or 3 beers, we could probably even solve the world's problems. So, it's all there in front of us. But, really thank you for sitting down with us and taking us through what you guys do at Rivial. It was really an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've never turned down a beer as long as I can buy the second round. So I'll take you up on that. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you all for listening. I'm Anthony Woodward.
And I'm Chris Brown. We'll see you next time on Filed.